Another round of diplomatic talks aimed at ending Russia's war on Ukraine happening this weekend in Miami. A senior Russian negotiator meeting today with U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff and President Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner. The Russian side says the talks are, quote, proceeding constructively. They are set to continue tomorrow. Meantime, Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky hinting today at his next step, saying the U.S. has proposed a new format for talks. We're joined now by former U.S. ambassador to NATO during the Obama administration, Ivo Daalder. Ambassador, always good to talk to you. So we've seen this real flurry of diplomacy, it would seem, in recent weeks. Do you believe, though, there's actually any progress being made?
No, unfortunately, I don't. I think what we are seeing is a narrowing of the differences between the United States and Europe and Ukraine on the one hand, but we're not seeing a narrow of the differences between Russia and Ukraine, and that's really what matters. This is a very strange negotiation in which the United States seeks to have a negotiation with one side, narrows those differences, and then tries to figure out a way to sell that to the other side. Here's the problem. As Vladimir Putin said just yesterday in his 4-hour-long press conference, he thinks that the war will end when Ukraine agrees to subjugate itself and it undermines its own independence, and Russia controls, if not all of the territory, at least all of the decision-making power in Ukraine. Ukraine's not going to be able and willing to accept that, and that's the fundamental problem. We have a war here for a simple reason. Russia wants Ukraine. Ukraine wants to maintain its independence, and as long as Russia is willing to use force to seek that end, we will have a war.
Do you see anything in terms of pressure that the U.S. or Europe could put on Russia that could shift that position?
Yeah, I do. I think Russia is facing serious economic pressure, continued sanctions, and in fact, bulking up of those sanctions, going after the shadow fleet that Russia is using in order to send oil to other countries, notably to China, will be one thing. We are, in fact, in the Caribbean, intercepting the shadow fleet from Venezuelan oil. Why don't we do the same with Russian oil? After all, the Russians are actually engaged in an active war against another country, a country that is in the middle of Europe, a Europe in which we have still today 76,000 troops, and for the last 80 years have demonstrated a sense that the security of Europe is important for us. So economic sanctions is one thing. Military aid is another thing. The United States has provided billions of dollars of military aid to Ukraine, as have the Europeans. But since President Trump came back, the Europeans will have to pay for every single bullet that the United States is sending to Ukraine. Why not just send that equipment, as we have done for the past 3.5 years, directly to Ukraine? So there is ways we can pressure Russia to start and to find a way to end this war.
Do you think there's any appetite for either one of those? Specifically, I would say the first one, since I think we know where this administration stands when it comes to, arming and additional funding.
Yeah, I think the additional funding, although there is $800 million in the defense budget that was signed by President Bush, but President Trump, but certainly not enough. On the economic pressure, there is economic pressure. The sanctioning of 2 major economic oil companies by the Russians will have a major impact and is having a major impact. But we need to do more, and we need to press more, rather than spending all of our time trying to find a political solution to a problem that really can only be solved if Russia comes to the conclusion that it won't achieve the goals it seeks by the use of force. Why don't we try to figure out a way to push Russia economically, politically, and even militarily to come to the table and negotiate a peace that is acceptable to all sides?
I was struck by what we heard this week in terms of NATO, right, which has been such a push from the Russian side, right? They want to make sure that in no way Ukraine can join NATO. We know this is obviously important in Ukraine, where it is in the Constitution, and yet we heard from President Zelensky a willingness to maybe drop that immediate push for joining the alliance. What do you make of that?
Well, I think President Zelensky is recognizing that so long as President Trump opposes Ukrainian membership in NATO, which he does indeed, so did President Biden, at least in the immediate term, he's not going to join NATO. So why not make hay out of that reality and say, okay, if we're not going to do immediate membership of Ukraine for NATO, give me at least NATO-like security guarantees, real security guarantees that are similar to NATO. And in fact, that it seems to be what the president and the administration has now been willing to provide, although we don't know the details and we haven't seen anything of it. But he has indicated, according to the European and American negotiators, a willingness to provide real security guarantees. And that's the core. Now, I would prefer to have Ukraine as a member of NATO. Ukraine would prefer to be a member of NATO. But if a commitment to real security guarantees gets the same result, then I see President Zelensky trying to go yet another distance in order to find a peaceful solution. But ultimately, the way we're going to end this war is a decision in Moscow. It's not in Kyiv, it's not in Washington, it's not even in Brussels. It has to be in Moscow.
Ambassador Ivo Daalder, appreciate it as always. Thank you.
My pleasure.